And we are in Judges, Book of Judges, and I hope you're all studied up on Judges, did some reading, and we're going to go into looking at a guy by the name of Ehud. But and there's the gal I was hoping to see. Good, so we can go that route today. And Nancy, good to see you. Yeah, we're gonna get into that area of your expertise here in a little bit. Yep. So anyhow, before we look at Ehud here in chapter 3, verse 12, of course, verse 12, is kind of the theme verse, right? Once again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and because of this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. So we're going to look at this guy named Eglon and the Moabite people who were a thorn in the side of Israel. But before we do that, we need to look at the idea that sometimes I believe that when people look at the Bible and they think of different people in the Bible, historical people in the Bible, they think, they're all just like Billy Graham. They're just perfect people and they don't have any mistakes or anything. But we're gonna look at this guy Ehud and see that's not the case. What was Ehud? Anybody know what's he known for? I mean, he's got like one thing he's really known for, other than he stabs an overweight guy. He had one characteristic trait that we don't think anything of it today, but back in ancient times they did. He was left-handed. So you think big deal. But honestly, back in ancient times, if you were left-handed, they considered that like a disability if you were left-handed. But it actually plays well into his story here. So let's read the text. There's not a whole lot of press here for Ehud, but that's okay. Yeah, no kidding. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sinister. Left eye sinister. Well, think about a very familiar name. Benjamin. Right? Who was a very famous person in the New Testament of the tribe of Benjamin? Be the Apostle Paul, right? And so Benjamin in Hebrew is actually pronounced Benjamin, which means son of my right arm. So the right arm's a strong arm, left arm's a weak arm. And so anyhow, it does play into the story today. It's been that way for a long time. Left-handed. So PJ's left-handed. Who else is left-handed? You're left-handed? Okay. You're left-handed? Jamie's left-handed? I never knew that. Anybody else? You're left-handed. Okay. A lot of left-hand people are like the artiste type people, the whatchamacallit people, the creative ones, and that kind of thing. And is that right? Oh, okay. Very good. Very good. What? Who'd have thunked it? That's cool. So Don, not to be confused with Don Juan. So the saying for today was, be with people who make you laugh. So that's a good one. That's a keeper. Yes. I love being with people. And I tell you, no one makes me laugh more than Bruce Vavernick. I tell you. Just love being around Bruce. Makes me laugh. He cracks me up. Yep. All right, so let's look at our text now. Verse 12. We read verse 12. Once again, the Israelites. Once again. We know that cycle. did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And, of course, they were given over to this big king of Moab. So, verse 13, getting the Ammonites and the Amalekites to join him, Eglon came, attacked Israel, took possession of the city of Palms, and you know what that is because you got a footnote. City of Palms is Jericho. And the Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. And I can tell you what, those weren't fun 18 years. Okay? They were subject to his reign and rule. Verse 15, again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer, Ehud, a left-handed man. You know, so that kind of gives you an idea about left-handedness. Ehud, a left-handed man, the son of Gera, the Benjamite. So he's a Benjamite, which is kind of ironic. Son of my right hand, and he's a left-handed guy. I thought about that just now. The Israelites sent him with tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. You know what I mean by tribute, right? What they're bringing him? What's a tribute? A present. A gift. More than likely it's going to be a monetary. Now, why would they be paying tribute to Eglon? That's right. He's ruling, he's reigning, and they're appeasing him. So maybe, you know, we give him a gift, he won't be so mean on us. All right, so they're sending him with a tribute. But this is going to be more like a little Trojan horse kind of thing. All right? So there's something in the gift. All right, going on, verse 16. Now Ehud had made a double-edged sword about 1.5 feet long, which is about a cubit. All right? Which he strapped to his right thigh under his clothing. And he presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab, who was a very, can't say that, it's not politically correct. He was a very large man. Okay. Okay. What does do any of the other translations clean it up? Because it says he's a fat man. And just, a what? He's a very fat man. What do you got there, PJ? Oh, okay. See, this always catches people who are not actually following along. And associate pastor wasn't following. Verse 17, I'm sorry. He presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab, who was a very fat man. What does yours have? Okay, well, he was obese, it appears. Okay. Oh, and they keep the F word in there? He's not just fat, he's grossly fat, okay? Morbidly obese, no doubt about it, okay? And one thing you can rest assured, I'm going to go off on a little rabbit trail here. When you're in a third world country, or in a times like that Ehud and Judges was written, and someone is extremely overweight, they're usually going to be people in power. And it's the same thing in Kenya. The people who are in power, the people who are political, they are the people who are a little plumper, if you will. Not necessarily morbidly obese or anything, but they're plumper. But you go out in the country where people are, living from hand to mouth, just barely making it. They're just skinny for a lot of reasons, and part of it may be a waterborne illness, but it's just kind of interesting. There seems to be a connection between wealth, power, and materialism and obeseness in the ancient world as well as third world today. Okay, so, all right, he was a very fat guy. All right, can't clean it up too much. Verse 18, after Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent them on their way, the men who had carried it. Okay, so he said, the rest of the guys, you guys go ahead and go. At the idols near Gilgal, he himself turned back and said, I have a secret message for you, king. The king said, quiet. And all his attendants left him. He's starting to lick his chops. He's thinking maybe, he's brought some KFC. But that was a joke. I couldn't help myself. Verse 20, Ehud then approached him while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his summer palace and said, I have a message from God for you. And as the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and he plunged it into the king's belly. Even the handle sank in after the blade, which came out his back. Now, by the way, you guys were prepared. I've told you 3 weeks in a row that Judges is gory, and it gets worse. Okay? It's gory. And this is what I'm talking about. It's pretty straightforward stuff. And Ehud did not even pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. Then Ehud went out the back door, and he shut the doors of the upper room behind him, and he locked them. After he had been gone, after he had left, the servants came and found the doors of the upper room locked, and they said, he must be relieving himself in the inner room of the house. And they waited to the point of embarrassment. But when he didn't open the doors of the room, they took a key, unlocked them, and there they saw their Lord fallen to the floor dead. While they waited, Ehud had gotten away. He passed by the idols and escaped to Sarah. When he arrived there, he blew a trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, the shofar. Ooh, you guys seen the shofar, the big ram's horn, Ooh, that's called a battle. So he blew a trumpet in the hill country, and the Israelites went down with him from the hills, with him leading them. Follow me, he ordered, for the Lord has given Moab, your enemy, into your hands. So they followed him down, taking possession of the fords of Jordan that led to Moab. They allowed no one to cross. At that time, they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all vigorous and strong. Not a man escaped. That day, Moab was made subject to Israel, and the land had peace for how long? 80 years. This is a long one right here. This is like 2 generations. Usually, generally speaking, 40 years is a generation. So basically 2 generations here. This is a long time. And if I'm not mistaken, and you correct me as we go along, but I think this was the longest period of peace during this period of the Judges that they had. Okay, so here we go. We got this Ehud guy. Time is about 1400 BC, 1350, somewhere in that time. And remember, Ehud was a left-handed guy. And so it's really interesting how God worked through this guy. And by the way, if Ehud is seen as a disabled guy, and God used him. And so I can't tell you how many times I've met with people and they think, I got my limitations. God can't use me. And, God used this left-handed guy who, in his time, would have been considered somewhat disabled. He used that which was appeared to others as a weakness as his strength to deliver the people. Okay? So never think that God can't use you. And sometimes we put these limitations on ourselves, and those are the very things that God can use to help us. Okay? Moses. Gotta say it like that. Moses. Yes, he was. And, Yeah, he had a deep voice, blah, blah, blah. But he talk like that, I don't know what his speech impediment was, whether it was a stutter or a lisp. Yeah, it doesn't really define that. But so he had to get Aaron. But that's a good point. You think about a lot of different Bible characters, people, and their whatever disability, their what appears to be their weakness, and we'll get that same thing when we get to Jephthah, and we'll see that in several of these judges. It's almost a common theme. Deborah, she's a woman, get to her. And again, I'm not saying in God's eyes, but in people's eyes, right? And they wouldn't expect no woman to be a deliverer, or a left-handed guy. But he was. He was. So, so this whole thing here with the left-handed guy, why did that give him an advantage? Well, right-handed people would have drawn their sword like this, right? Left-hand people would do like this, right? And so as he was coming in to see the king, no doubt they checked him. Well, he didn't say any sword, on this side here. And so, in fact, he had it hidden and was not caught with that sword that he had on his other side, which they were not expecting, because that's not where most of the people had their swords. So he got through that, and he appealed to his greed and vanity and whatnot, and to get him to get some private time alone. And so, as is the case, I think every single time in the Judges, it's going to be by violence that they're in fact going to get their country back and to be redeemed, if you will. And so, even though he's a sense of, a deliverer, a savior for these guys at the time, it's very violent. Very violent. And so they had peace for 80 years. But poor old Eglon, he was, it's just kind of a gross story. Sorry. No way you can clean it up. But you're going to learn a lot about the culture at the time, and how, they saw the king and how he lived and so on. But yeah. So and again, we'll see this not only in Judges, but also in the Kings. Sometimes it only takes one guy to get things going. One guy who listens to God, who takes daring action, and when that happens, then the people will join in. Can you think of another story where one person came up against impossible odds and led to an event that caused the other people to be inspired and follow that person? Who? David, right? David, this little kid who came up against this great big tall guy. And no one else would come up against him. Because, he was over 9 foot tall. And here comes this little boy, David. 5 little smooth stones from the riverbank, Put one in his little sling. Round and round it went. How's that song go, Vera May? Round and round. And hits him in the head. Anyhow, because all the other guys wouldn't do anything, they got intimidated. But when this guy defeated Goliath, man, everybody's inspired, and they came right behind him. You will see this time and time again. So, imagine what you can do. One person, your inspiration, and make a huge difference. In this case with Ehud, made a difference for 80 years. Alrighty. Well, again, the story plays out again of God hears his people. They cry out to him, sends them Ehud. He provides this catalyst, the spark to get things going, and delivers his people, even though it is gross. All right, let's move on. Now, Shamgar, I'm not going to spend any time on Shamgar because there's not a whole lot of press on him. Because after that 80 years, Shamgar came, and he struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad. And he too saved Israel. Just not a whole lot of press on him. Must not have been a real interesting guy. But what is an ox goad? Brian, you know what an ox goad is? Oh, look at Connie's working her ox goad out there. Huh? What's it look like? No, we have no cattle people here? An ox goad? Austin, have you ever used an ox goad? Could you describe one? With a hook? Maybe? Sharp point, yeah, exactly. That's the thing. It's an ox goad. It makes an ox goad, goad. And they just poke them in the rear with it, and it makes them go. Yeah, it's a long stick. It's just yeah. Yeah, we used to, when I was in the cattle killing business, we used these prods with batteries in them. It's a terrible thing. I hate it. It's a terrible job. Huh? What are you agreeing about over there? Yeah. Yeah, it was a crazy business. I'm so thankful to be out of it. But anyhow, anyhow, so he killed all these Philistines, 600 of them with an ox goad. So anyhow, that's how he delivered. But there's not a lot of press, which then takes it to one of my favorite ladies, and there's a lot of press for this gal, and I want to spend maybe a couple of weeks with this gal, Deborah, because it's so interesting. As we look at Ehud, who is just this left-handed guy with a disability, and yet God used that disability to be the catalyst for deliverance of his people that led to peace for 80 years. Now we get this woman. Now I wasn't being sarcastic when I said this woman, because you got to look at it not in the eyes of 21st century America, but in the time of the judges, about 1400 BC, about 1300 BC, somewhere in there. The dates aren't all that accurate. But they had a different view of women back then. And it was a man's world for sure. Yes. Oh, Ehud. Mm-hmm. And by the way, it's not me. I'm merely reflecting on the sentiment in the time of Ehud, because they literally saw left-handed people as being disabled. That the strength is in your right arm, not your left. And so, no reflection on left-handers today. Yeah, he's a left-handed man. So please, take no offense. So in chapter 4, which is interesting because follow how this happens. We had Ehud, delivered the people, 80 years. But then we have, after Ehud, came Shamgar. But then in verse 1 of chapter 4, it says, after Ehud died, the Israelites did evil once again, which is kind of interesting. There was a Shamgar in between, but I don't get that. I don't know why that's the case, other than Shamgar just didn't make that big of a deal. Other than the reason why he gets the press is not necessarily that he was a judge or his leadership, was simply his this big record of killing all these Philistines. But anyhow, we see that after Ehud had died, the Israelites once again, you see that pattern? Once again, did evil in the eyes of the Lord, so the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin. Remember that name, Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera. He's the commander. Jabin is the king. Sisera was his commander, who lived in Harosheth. Okay, and you can pronounce the last name, other part of it. Verse 3, because he had 900 iron chariots and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. 20 years now. How many years was it before Ehud came? How long were they oppressed? 18, right? Now we got prior to Deborah, under Jabin, it was 20 years of being oppressed. And what did the Israelites do? Cry out to the Lord. Cry out to the Lord for help. And Deborah, okay, here comes the gal. Who's Deborah? She's a prophetess. The wife of Lapidoth was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites came to her to have their disputes decided. Now, this is very interesting to me. This lady, Deborah, she was judging cases. She was making decisions. She was counseling people when they had disputes. And she's quite an inspirational person here. And it just makes you wonder, how did she rise to such an occasion? you know? Yeah, it's just interesting that she did in this time. So anyhow, she's up here, having their decisions, their disputes decided on, and she sent for Barak. Now Barak is a commander, very much like Sisera, but she sent for Barak, the son of Abinoam, from the Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go and take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead the way to Mount Tabor. I will lure Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River, and give him into your hands." So now we have Deborah in the Old Testament, 1300 BC. Not only is she settling disputes amongst people, now she's telling the commander, "You go get the men, and then you're going to attack these people because the Lord will give them into your hands." Wait a minute. Doesn't she know her place? Obviously not, huh? Absolutely. This is so counterculture. So counterculture. And where I'm going with this, because I have a little bit of a hobby. I like to ride from time to time, just simply because of my past. But here is a leader, one who is commanding men, and she's a woman. Just keep that in mind. Verse 9, but listen to Barak. I love what he says. He said, "If you go with me, I'll go, but if you don't, I'm not going. I'm not going without you." Now, why would he say that, do you think? And then we'll look at her answer, because it's kind of interesting. Why do you think that Barak would say, "Hey, Deborah, I'm not going without you"? Why do you suppose he would say that? Yes. I think that's absolutely it. This Deborah, everybody knew that she was blessed of God. In her wisdom, decision making, very respected, knew that God was with her. Now you think about this. When Israel would go into battle, what would they like to take with them? What artifact did they like to take with them? The Ark of the Covenant, God's presence. Presence in battle meant victory. Keep that in mind as I preach later on today about God's presence. But he wanted to have God's presence with him. And he believed that God's presence, his wisdom, his blessing was upon Deborah. And so did obviously the other people. And so that's why he's saying it. And it's not so much that Barak is a sissy, which when I used to read this years ago, I thought, what a sissy. Go, Barak. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. But look what Deborah says in response to it. He says, "Very well, I'll go with you. But because of the way you're going about this, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will hand Sisera over to a woman." What woman is he going to hand him over to? It's not going to be Deborah. It's not going to be Deborah, but it's going to be another woman. The victory, the military victory is going to be, and the honor is going to be given to another woman who's actually going to bring victory. Okay? So let's go on with the story, because it also gets very gross as well. All right, Betty, you've already read ahead. You know what I'm talking about, right? So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh, where he summoned Zebulun and Naphtali. 10,000 men followed him, and Deborah also went with him. Now Heber, the Canaanite, had left the other Canaanites and descendants of Hobab, Moses' brother-in-law, and pitched his tent by the great tree in a place with a Z and a lot of other letters next to it. And when they told Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera gathered together his 900 iron chariots and all the men with him. And iron chariots at that time, they were like M1 Abrams tanks. They were like we've got we got technology, we've got armament. We're putting our trust in our army, and we'll see how well that goes with him. Verse 14, then Deborah said to Barak, go. This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? So Barak went down to Mount Tabor, followed by his 10,000 guys. And at Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army by the sword. And Sisera in his chariot, and he fled on foot. So they're getting whooped. And so Sisera, who is who? He's the commander, right? He's the general. He's running. And so he took off. And all the troops of Sisera fell by the sword. Not a man was left. I'm telling you, it's rough times. Verse 17, though, Sisera, however, fled on foot to the tent of Jael. Don't forget Jael. Sisera and Jael. Jael's a woman. So he goes to her tent. Okay? And she says, come, my lord. Come right in. Don't be afraid. So she's bringing him into the tent. So he entered her tent, and she put a covering over him. Here, you look tired. Rest. I'm thirsty, he said. Give me some water. Oh, she gave him a skin of milk and gave him a drink of it and covered him up. And he said, stand in the doorway, he said, and if someone comes by and asks, is he here? Say no. This is where the plot thickens. But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. And she drove a peg through the temple of his head into the ground, and he died. And so Barak came by in pursuit, and Jael went out to meet him. Come, she said, I'll show you the man you're looking for. I just put a nail in his head. I added that part, by the way. So he went in with her, and there he is with a tent peg through the temple, dead. And on that day, God subdued Jabin, the Canaanite king, before the Israelites, and the hand of Israelites grew stronger and stronger again against Jabin and the Canaanite king until they destroyed him. Okay. Very graphic, very rough. Who got the honor of this victory? Jael. Jael. And I remember my Bible professor, Dr. Pryor, he always said that Sisera was killed by Jael with a Nael. And I always remembered it like that. And so the victory was given to Jael, a woman. She got the honor for this victory here. But again, terrible, isn't it? The way that this change comes about. But let's go back to Deborah and the fact that she, as a woman, and by the way, chapter 5, you're going to get a song here. Sometimes we saw this back in, where was it? Exodus? Where we saw the song of who? Miriam. Very good. Very good. And so when there were victories, we'll see in Kings, when David had a lot of victories, they create these songs to remember the victory. And so we have the song of Deborah then coming on. When princes in Israel take lead, when the people willingly offer themselves, praise the Lord, And so they've got this wonderful song, in honor of Deborah in the victory. I've got a couple places marked out in this song, like verse 9. My heart is with Israel's princes, with the willing volunteers among the people. Praise the Lord. And then down about verse 15. The princes of Issachar were with Deborah. Yes, Issachar was with Barak, rushing after him into the valley, into the districts of Reuben. There was much searching of heart. Why did you stay among the campfires to hear the whistling for the flocks? And so, anyhow, the idea is that the talk is cheap, the whistling for the flocks. And anyhow, so it's a story based in, obviously, their culture and whatnot. Verse 19, kings came, they fought. The kings of Canaan fought at Tanakh, the waters of Megiddo. Remember Megiddo? But they carried off no silver and no plunder. And then it gets down in memorize. It brings a memorial to Sisera. Through the window peered Sisera's mother. Behind the lattice she cried out, "Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why is the clatter of his chariots delayed?" So you can see Mama looking out the window, you know. He's not coming home. That's because this gal put a nail through his head. Okay? I don't know about that. It didn't say. It does? Where does it say left hand? Does it really? I didn't even see that. Verse 26. There is no 26 in chapter 4. Oh, chapter 5, verse 26. Her hand reached for the tent peg. Her right hand for the workman's hammer. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, she used both hands. Yeah. Yeah, so I'd like to read in a connection, but she using both hands. Right hand hammer. So. Yeah, but I think most right-handed people would use the hammer in the right hand. Wouldn't you do that, Jamie? Left-hand people. You hammer with your left hand, don't you? She's right-handed. Sorry, can't make the connection. She's obviously right-handed. So anyhow, again, yeah. So it's an interesting story there. Next week we'll pick up with Gideon, but back to this woman thing. So you have this leader, and so for years, men have tried to say that women have no leading role, and yet we can see time after time where God has actually used women in very strong leadership roles in with His covenant people. And in this particular case, we're in the covenant of Moses. Okay, so we see it then, and so when we come to New Testament church, even though we come out of this Old Testament background, we're grandchildren, if you will, of Israel. God still uses women in very leading roles. And so Deborah's a very powerful example of that. And so I have a real interest in making sure that tradition of holding women back where God has gifted them needs to be held back. Okay, now I promised you I was going to talk somewhat about Baal, okay, because we're at the heart of what we're battling with here is Baal. The evilness that was in the land of Canaan and why God has sent and commissioned His people was Baal. So, Nancy, I know you've done some study on Baal, and there's a ton of information and study material out there comparing ancient Baal worship in today, in some of the practices today. Now, you won't find people saying, "Oh yeah, we worship Baal," but yet in fact, what they do is modern day Baal worship. Now, one of the things which is, I warned you ahead of time. This is a horrifying time in Israel. It's not just these were bad people; these were evil people. And in the worship of Molech, remember I told you Baal is like an umbrella, and there are a lot of different shred outs of Baal worship. And this child sacrifice thing, where you have this basically it's a man with a bull's head, and they made him out of like bronze, and they heat it up, and then they put the baby into his hands or into his belly, and literally burn this child alive for purposes of hopefully having more children. It's a sacrifice to this fertility god, and it's absolutely terrible. But in particular, one of them was they put the child. I'm not going to say it. We got kids coming in. It's horrifying. I'll pick it up next week, okay? With that, and Nancy, come on prepared next week to share what you've learned about Baal worship and modern Baal worship today. We'll make some comparisons, and you'd be surprised how much paganism is going on today. And it comes under different headings, use different terms, but in practice, it's the same thing. And it's very scary. It's very scary. Okay? And it has become very much acceptable. And if you think about it in the time, even up until the time of Hezekiah, King Hezekiah, very much acceptable. And his father sacrificed one of his brothers to Molech. Why would you do this? I mean, it's just... But let's bring application today. Who would sacrifice a child today? Happens every day. Happens every day. And so we'll get into that. Matter of fact, it's kind of a segue into something you're going to do later on here today. You've got, and you and Cheryl have talked, and you might want to chat about that. Okay, we're done. You guys ought to compare notes too. All right.